Windows Game Mode claims to boost your FPS, improve stability, and give you smoother gameplay. But does it actually do anything? In this video, I tested Windows Game Mode on versus off across multiple games using CapFrameX to track average FPS, 1% lows, and frame time consistency. No opinions, no guessing, just real benchmarks. By the end of this video, you'll know whether Windows Game Mode is worth enabling, or if it's just another placebo setting you should ignore. Before starting this video, please consider subscribing and drop a like on this video because making these kind of videos need multiple game restarts and lots of efforts. So, let's get into the tests. To eliminate variables and isolate game mode's true impact, we maintained a controlled testing environment. We used identical hardware, drivers, and Windows settings for every benchmark. The games were tested at the same competitive settings, in the same scenarios, running the same routes. The only variable changed was the Windows Game Mode toggle. All benchmarks were captured using CapFrameX for professional-grade frame time analysis, focusing not just on average FPS, but more importantly, on the consistency metrics that determine real gameplay smoothness. Starting with Fortnite at competitive settings, Game Mode On delivers an average FPS of 238.7. The P95, representing the frame rate that 95% of frames exceed, is 311.9 FPS, showing decent peak performance. However, the low percentile metrics tell a more nuanced story. The P1, the worst 1% of frames, is 201.5 frames per second. The 1% low average, a crucial metric for sustained performance during demanding moments, is 173.5 frames per second. This means, in intense build fights or endgame scenarios, your performance floor sits around 173 frames per second. The 0.1% low average, representing the absolute worst-case moments, is 112.2 frames per second. These numbers suggest that with Game Mode on, Fortnite delivers playable performance, but shows room for improvement in consistency, particularly during the most demanding scenarios where smoothness matters most for building and editing precision. Now, the same Fortnite test with Game Mode off reveals a fascinating pattern. The average FPS actually increases to 260.6, a gain of nearly 22 FPS, or roughly a 9% improvement by turning Game Mode off. The P95 sees a more substantial jump to 367.7 frames per second. However, the low percentile story is mixed. The P1 decreases to 183.9 frames per second, and the 1% low average drops significantly to 131.1 frames per second, a concerning 24% reduction in worst-case sustained performance. Most alarmingly, the 0.1% low average plummets to 80.8 frames per second, meaning the absolute worst moments now dip into the 80s instead of the hundreds. So, while average and peak frames per second improve with Game Mode off, the consistency and low-end performance suffer dramatically. This creates a genuine dilemma: higher averages but more severe drops. Moving to Counter-Strike 2, a game where input consistency is everything. With Game Mode on, the average FPS is 262.5. The P95 is an impressive 537.6 FPS, showing excellent peak performance. The low percentiles, however, tell a different story. The P1 is 165.5 frames per second, and the 1% low average is 139.7 frames per second. The 0.1% low average is 118.4 frames per second. This indicates that during smokes, mollies, or intense firefights, your performance floor sits around 118 frames per second. For a tactical shooter where every frame of input latency matters, these low percentile numbers are crucial. The data suggests Game Mode on provides decent consistency, but may not be optimizing the low-end performance as effectively as one might hope from a feature designed specifically for gaming. Testing Counter-Strike 2 with Game Mode off reveals a completely different performance profile. The average FPS actually decreases slightly to 243.7 FPS, about a 7% drop from the game mode on results. However, look at the low percentile consistency. The P1 is 129.1 frames per second, and the 1% low average is 120.1 frames per second, both improvements over game mode on. Most notably, the 0.1% low average improves to 102.7 frames per second, creating a more stable performance floor. The P95, however, drops to 482 frames per second. This creates an intriguing pattern. Game mode off sacrifices some peak performance, P95, and average frames per second, but delivers better consistency in the low percentiles. For CS2 players, this trade-off might be worthwhile. A slightly lower average FPS, but fewer catastrophic frame drops during critical moments. Examining both games side by side reveals that game mode is not a simple good or bad toggle. It creates different performance profiles based on the game engine. In Fortnite, game mode off boosts average FPS by 9%, but severely hurts low percentile consistency, with the 1% low average dropping 24% and the 0.1% low average dropping 28%. This suggests game mode is providing some protective consistency layer for Fortnite, possibly by managing background processes more aggressively, but at the cost of average performance. In Counter-Strike 2, we see the opposite pattern. Game mode on provides higher average FPS, 7% better, and much higher peak performance. P95 is 537.6 versus 482, but slightly worse low percentile consistency. The 0.1% low average is better with game mode off, 102.7 versus 118.4. This indicates game mode may be optimizing differently for Source 2 engine, perhaps prioritizing different resource allocations. The takeaway is clear. Game mode's impact is game-specific. It's not universally beneficial or detrimental. It changes the performance profile in ways that might benefit certain games and hurt others. Based on our data, Windows game mode is neither a pure FPS boost nor a complete placebo. It's a performance profile shifter. Its value depends entirely on your priorities and the specific games you play. For Fortnite players, I recommend keeping game mode on. While you sacrifice about 9% average FPS, you gain substantially better low percentile consistency. Your worst-case scenarios are 24 to 28% better. In a game where sudden frame drops can disrupt building and editing muscle memory, this consistency is more valuable than higher average FPS with severe drops to 80 FPS. For Counter-Strike 2 players, the decision is more nuanced. If you prioritize peak performance and average FPS, keep game mode on. If you prioritize absolute consistency and want to minimize the worst frame drops, consider game mode off. The 0.1% low average improvement, 118 to 103 FPS, with game mode off, could mean smoother aim during the most demanding moments. For mixed gaming setups, consider leaving game mode on as a default. Its consistency benefits in some games outweigh the average FPS costs, and it provides a more predictable performance profile across your library. The feature does work, it's just not working how many people assume. It's not a simple FPS boost, but rather a consistency optimizer that trades some peak performance for better low-end stability in certain titles. If this data-driven breakdown helped clarify the game mode dilemma for you, please like this video. It genuinely supports the channel. Subscribe to FrameLogic for more evidence-based optimization content where we test what actually works versus what's just placebo. Let me know in the comments, will you keep game mode on or off for your specific games? What other Windows features should we test with this level of scrutiny? Thanks for watching, and remember, optimize through evidence, not anecdotes.